Hey everyone, this is the Mindscape channel. Welcome. Today we're diving headfirst into the tumultuous world of modern military history. It's a bit daunting, right? Like opening a textbook the size of a small car. But don't worry, we're in this together. We're going to journey through time, exploring the major conflicts that have shaped our world. From the battlefields of Europe to the jungles of Southeast Asia, we'll uncover the causes, the key players, the turning points, and the lasting consequences. And perhaps most importantly, we'll try to understand the human cost of these conflicts. Hello. Before the video continues, let me ask everyone to subscribe. It's easy, really. Just smash the subscribe button. Do it now. We need your help to build our channel. It's all about the algorithm. Okay, let's rewind the clock back to the late 18th century. Europe's a powder keg, and a little guy named Napoleon Bonaparte is about to light the fuse. See, Napoleon wasn't just some power-hungry tyrant. Well, he was, but he was also a brilliant military strategist. This guy conquered most of Europe, and not by accident. He revolutionized warfare, using speed and maneuverability to outwit his enemies. For over a decade, the Napoleonic Wars raged on, pitting France against a revolving door of coalitions. Britain, Russia, Austria, Prussia, they all took their shots. But Napoleon, he kept knocking them down. That is, until his disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. The Russian winter, you see, doesn't mess around. Napoleon's army was decimated and his grip on power began to slip. The final showdown came in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. It was a clash of titans, with Napoleon facing off against the Duke of Wellington. And this time, Napoleon, he met his match. He was defeated, exiled, and the Napoleonic era came to an end. Now, you might be thinking, Ken, where was the US in all of this? And that's a great question. The US was still a relatively new nation trying to find its footing. They mostly sat this one out, maintaining a policy of neutrality. But that's not to say the Napoleonic Wars didn't impact them. They totally did, shaping the political landscape of the 19th century. From the battlefields of Europe, we shift our focus to a nation at war with itself. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, a conflict so central to American identity it continues to resonate today. At its heart, the Civil War was a struggle over slavery and the balance of power between the federal government and individual states. The southern states, fearing the abolition of slavery, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. And thus began one of the bloodiest chapters in American history. Brother fought against brother, families were torn apart, and the nation was scarred by the horrors of war. From the first shots fired at Fort Sumter to the pivotal battles of Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the Civil War was a brutal test of wills. The Union, with its industrial might and larger population, eventually prevailed. But the cost of victory was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers lay dead, and the South lay in ruins. The legacy of slavery and the scars of division, however, would continue to haunt the nation for generations to come. And while the Civil War was primarily an internal struggle, it did have international implications. European powers, eager to see the United States weakened, largely stayed out of the conflict. The Union's victory helped preserve the nation's unity and paved the way for the abolition of slavery, a watershed moment in human history. Now, across the Atlantic, another conflict was brewing. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871 would reshape the map of Europe, leading to the unification of Germany and the decline of French hegemony. At the heart of this conflict was Otto von Bismarck, the cunning Prussian statesman. Bismarck, a master of realpolitik, aimed to unite the fragmented German states under Prussian leadership, and what better way to unite a people than against a common enemy? France, under Emperor Napoleon III, played right into Bismarck's hands. A series of diplomatic blunders and miscalculations led to a declaration of war. The Prussians, with their superior military organization and tactics, quickly overwhelmed the French. The Battle of Sedan proved decisive, resulting in the capture of Napoleon III and the collapse of the Second French Empire. The Treaty of Frankfurt, which formally ended the war, was a humiliating blow to France. They were forced to cede valuable territory and pay a hefty war indemnity. The United States, still grappling with the aftermath of its own civil war, maintained a neutral stance during the Franco-Prussian War. The conflict, however, had a profound impact on the global balance of power. A unified Germany emerged as a dominant force in Europe, setting the stage for the tumultuous century to come. The year 1914, Europe, a continent teetering on the brink. A tangled web of alliances fueled by nationalism and imperial ambition was about to unravel. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, provided the spark. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and just like that, the dominoes began to fall. Germany, France, Russia, Britain, all were drawn into the conflict, their fates intertwined in a deadly embrace. World War I, the war to end all wars, had begun. What followed was a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality. Trench warfare became the norm, a gruesome stalemate where soldiers faced unimaginable horrors. Machine guns, poison gas, tanks, the weapons of war had evolved, and with them the nature of combat itself. Millions of soldiers were locked in a deadly embrace, fighting for every inch of mud-soaked ground. The United States, initially hesitant to get involved, was eventually drawn into the conflict in 1917. The sinking of the Lusitania by a German U-boat and the infamous Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a German-Mexican alliance against the US, swayed public opinion. The arrival of American troops on the Western Front helped to tip the balance in favor of the Allies. In 1918, Germany, exhausted and facing defeat, signed the armistice. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to ensure peace, instead sowed the seeds for future conflict. Germany, burdened by war guilt and crippling reparations, was ripe for exploitation, and exploit they did. A charismatic leader, Adolf Hitler, rose to power, promising to restore Germany to its former glory. Hitler's ambitions, however, extended far beyond Germany's borders. He dreamed of a vast Aryan empire, a dream that would plunge the world into darkness once more. World War II, a conflict even more devastating than its predecessor, had begun. Hitler's Germany, allied with fascist Italy and Imperial Japan, unleashed a wave of aggression across the globe. From the invasion of Poland in 1939 to the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Axis powers seemed unstoppable. The world watched in horror as Hitler's armies marched across Europe, crushing all opposition. The United States, initially hesitant to get involved, was once again drawn into the conflict by a surprise attack. The bombing of Pearl Harbor galvanized the nation, uniting Americans against a common enemy. The US, along with its allies, fought on multiple fronts, from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. The war culminated in the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a controversial act that brought about Japan's surrender and ushered in the atomic age. The ashes of World War II had barely settled when a new conflict erupted, this time on the Korean peninsula. Korea, once a unified nation, was divided after the war, with a communist North supported by the Soviet Union and a capitalist South backed by the United States. In 1950, North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung, launched a surprise invasion of the South, hoping to reunify the peninsula under communist rule. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, sprang into action. Under the auspices of the United Nations, a US-led coalition intervened, pushing back the North Korean forces. The Korean War was a brutal conflict marked by intense fighting and heavy casualties. The Chinese, fearing a US presence on their border, entered the war on the side of North Korea, turning the tide once more. The war raged on for 3 years, a bloody stalemate that claimed the lives of millions. An armistice agreement was finally signed in 1953, but no peace treaty was ever reached. Korea remained divided, a stark reminder of the Cold War's global reach. The Korean War, often overshadowed by World War II and Vietnam, left an enduring legacy shaping the geopolitical landscape of East Asia for decades to come. From the battlefields of Korea, we turn our attention to the jungles of Vietnam. The Vietnam War, a protracted and deeply divisive conflict, would leave an indelible mark on American society. Vietnam, like Korea, was a nation divided, with a communist North and a US-backed South. The North, led by Ho Chi Minh, sought to reunify the country under communist rule. The United States, fearing the domino theory, the idea that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, others would follow, gradually escalated its involvement in the conflict. What began as a small-scale military advisory role soon transformed into a full-blown war. American soldiers found themselves fighting a determined enemy, the Viet Cong, in a hostile and unforgiving environment. The Vietnam War was a quagmire, a conflict that seemed to have no end in sight. Key events like the Tet Offensive, while militarily defeats for the Viet Cong turned American public opinion against the war. The images of carnage and chaos broadcast into American homes nightly eroded support for the war effort. In 1973, the United States signed a peace agreement and withdrew its troops. 2 years later, Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, fell to the north, effectively ending the war. The Vietnam War left deep scars on the American psyche, raising questions about the limits of American power and the morality of intervention. In 1982, a seemingly insignificant group of islands in the South Atlantic became the unlikely battleground for a brief but intense conflict between the United Kingdom and Argentina. The Falkland Islands, a British overseas territory, had long been claimed by Argentina. When Argentina invaded the islands, hoping to bolster its own nationalist credentials, the UK, under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, responded with swift and decisive force. The Falklands War was a distant conflict, fought thousands of miles from both London and Buenos Aires, but for both nations the stakes were high. For the UK, it was a test of its resolve, a chance to reassert its global standing after years of decline. For Argentina, it was a gamble, a desperate attempt to rally a nation behind a common cause. The war lasted just 74 days, but it was a brutal affair marked by naval battles, airstrikes, and fierce fighting on the ground. In the end, the UK prevailed, retaking the Falklands and asserting its sovereignty. The United States, while officially neutral, provided logistical support to the UK during the conflict. The Falklands War, though brief, had lasting consequences, shaping Anglo-Argentine relations for decades to come. In August 1990, the world watched in horror as Iraqi forces, under the command of Saddam Hussein, stormed into neighboring Kuwait, a small oil-rich nation. Hussein, emboldened by his military might and regional ambitions, declared Kuwait Iraq's 19th province, triggering an international crisis. The United States, under President George H.W. Bush, condemned the invasion and rallied international support for a military response. The First Gulf War, codenamed Operation Desert Storm, was a testament to the power of coalition warfare. A US-led coalition of 35 nations, backed by United Nations Security Council resolutions, launched a massive air and ground offensive against Iraq. The world watched as precision-guided munitions rained down on Iraqi targets, a stark demonstration of American military technological superiority. The ground campaign, when it came, was swift and decisive. Coalition forces, led by the United States, liberated Kuwait in a matter of days, routing the Iraqi army. Hussein's forces were crushed, his ambitions thwarted. The First Gulf War was a decisive victory for the United States and its allies, but it left Saddam Hussein in power, setting the stage for future conflicts in the region. The shadow of the September 11th attacks loomed large over the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. President George W. Bush, invoking the specter of weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein's alleged ties to terrorism, rallied the nation for war. Despite international opposition and the lack of a clear UN mandate, the US, along with a coalition of willing allies, launched a preemptive strike against Iraq. The invasion itself was swift, toppling Saddam Hussein's regime in a matter of weeks. But the victory proved Pyrrhic. The Bush administration's claims of weapons of mass destruction proved unfounded, and the occupation of Iraq became mired in a bloody insurgency. American soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves fighting a shadowy enemy in a complex and unforgiving environment. The Iraq War became a defining conflict of the 21st century, a cautionary tale about the limits of American power and the unintended consequences of military intervention. The war dragged on for years, claiming the lives of thousands of American soldiers and countless Iraqi civilians. The US withdrawal in 2011 left behind a fragile nation still grappling with the legacy of conflict and the rise of new threats, including the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, the United States launched a global war on terror, targeting al-Qaeda and its Taliban protectors in Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom, as it was known, began with a swift campaign to topple the Taliban regime and deny al-Qaeda a safe haven. American special forces, working alongside Afghan allies, quickly routed the Taliban, driving them from power. But the victory proved short-lived. The Taliban, though dispersed, were far from defeated. They retreated to the rugged mountains along the Afghan-Pakistan border, regrouping and launching a relentless insurgency against the US-backed Afghan government. The United States, along with its NATO allies, found itself drawn into a protracted and costly conflict, one that would span 2 decades and multiple presidencies. The war in Afghanistan became America's longest war, a grueling and ultimately futile attempt to build a stable and democratic nation in a country riven by ethnic tensions, corruption, and a resurgent Taliban. The US withdrawal in 2021, chaotic and poorly executed, led to the collapse of the Afghan government and the Taliban's return to power, a sobering reminder of the limits of American power and the enduring challenges of nation-building. In 2014, the world watched as Russia, under the leadership of Vladimir Putin, annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine, a former Soviet republic. The annexation, widely condemned by the international community, marked a turning point in East-West relations, reigniting Cold War tensions and raising fears of a wider conflict in Europe. The conflict in Ukraine, however, was more than just a territorial dispute. It was a clash of ideologies, a struggle between Russia's desire to reassert its influence in its former sphere of influence and Ukraine's aspiration to align itself with the West. The conflict in eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists battled Ukrainian government forces, became a proxy war fueled by both sides with weapons and rhetoric. The United States, along with its European allies, responded to Russia's aggression with a combination of sanctions and military aid to Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine highlighted the fragility of the post-Cold War order and the challenges of dealing with a resurgent Russia. It also underscored the importance of NATO as a bulwark against Russian expansionism and the need for a united Western response to Russian aggression. From the Napoleonic Wars to the conflict in Ukraine, we've covered a lot of ground, explored the complex causes and consequences of some of the most significant military conflicts in modern history. We've seen how these events have shaped nations, toppled empires, and redefined the global order. But beyond the grand narratives and geopolitical shifts, it's important to remember the human cost of conflict. The millions of lives lost, the families torn apart, the enduring legacies of trauma and displacement. These are the true costs of war. As we've journeyed through history together, I hope we've gained a deeper understanding of these conflicts and their lasting impact on our world. And perhaps, just perhaps, by studying the past, we can find ways to build a more peaceful future. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged with the world around you. The most famous quote about history repeating itself is, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," by George Santayana. Santayana wrote this in his 1905 book, The Life of Reason. Please remember, we need your support. Please click subscribe. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more content, and share it with your friends. If you've enjoyed this video and want to support this channel, please subscribe and click the thumbs up button or thumbs down. Also, leave us a comment, good or bad, we want to hear from you. More videos are coming. We appreciate your feedback, ideas, criticism, Use the comments to tell us your thoughts. Thank you for watching.